I'm a painter and a sculptor and an artist. I don't do special effects. I do characters, I do creatures. This was spoken by visual effects master Stan Winston, whose lifetime worth of acclaimed works covered half a century of iconic Hollywood creatures. The best of these depicted imagery just close enough to the real world to be recognizable, while retaining an otherworldly quality that ignited our primal fears, with some of the purest and most malicious examples being the Xenomorph from Alien, the T-800 from the Terminator, and the Yautja from Predator. It's one thing to be considered the peak of just one genre, but it's another entirely to retain that reputation in multiple genres across decades. But that's exactly what was accomplished here with these three franchises, serving as the foremost synthesis of action, horror, and science fiction. So with that, this is every Alien, Terminator, and Predator movie ranked. I hope you enjoyed the video.
Bleeds.
We can kill it.
Number 20. These three have been so successful now they've crossed over from films to just about every conceivable medium, from novelizations to video games, graphic novels, action figures, fanfiction, and of course with it, a kind of endless playground speculation on who would beat who if ever pit together in a fight. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. The dark side of this is that seemingly any product, no matter how horrific or vile, still has a chance to be greenlit so long as the name of the property is attached. And that's how you get Aliens vs Predator Requiem, a film where a Pred-Alien hybrid wanders through Middle America, murdering pregnant women, children, and babies. No! I could go on, but fuck, what more do you need to know? There's even a point where the Pred-Alien finds this one unassuming woman who is mere moments away from giving birth, and with absolutely no relevance to the plot, it starts pumping its own eggs down her throat. No. When you have something amazing like Alien with all of its existentially horrific concepts like forced impregnation, this is the kind of edgelord garbage that can spawn because the creators couldn't tell the difference.
It's fucking horrible, yeah?
Then matching the snuff film vibe is the straight to DVD quality. Whenever the creatures aren't on screen, which is far too frequent for a movie called Aliens vs Predator, we're stuck with a bunch of stock characters whose estranged relationships are boring, self-contained, and usually don't even get finished. Gotcha, bitch! Basically nothing builds to anything, events just happen and some of them are fucking sadistic for its own sake. And so I'd safely say there is absolutely nothing to get out of this one, save for exactly one line that I enjoyed.
I think the Colonel was lying.
That's crazy, the government doesn't lie to people.
Good one. Yep, that was a good one.
The one innovation you could point to is the Pred-Alien itself. This was a natural direction to go, since we know the Xenomorph incubates within its victims and takes on their characteristics. The previous movie also ended on a Yautja having its chest burst open. So the Pred-Alien was inevitable. That said, the design still doesn't work, because the Xenomorph is already a perfect organism, and any deviation from that design will only reduce its purity. Daddy! And what distinguishes the Yautja from the Xenomorph is its intelligence. It hunts with a code of honor while being proficient with various tools and technology, giving it an aptitude that separates it from all other monsters. This is precisely why they've been such a perfect monster-hunter dichotomy, ever since comic book writers Randy Stradley and Chris Warner first crossed them over together on the page in 1989. But since the Pred-Alien cannot integrate the traits that make the Yautja so formidable, what we have is essentially just a giant Xenomorph with dreads, and it's no more capable than any of the brain-dead Predator dogs that the franchise keeps pushing, leaving us with an abomination that could neither hold its own against Alien or Predator in their purest forms, and if it went up against either of them, it would get absolutely wrecked.
Predator wins.
For an idea that has had hundreds of iterations, there's really just no excuse whatsoever for their blockbuster film appearance to be this decadent or repulsive. These people had a chance to play gracefully with two of cinema's most iconic creatures under a premise that even young children smashing their toys together could understand. But instead they used it to exercise some really fucked up fetishes that retained all of the depravity but none of the substance, and for some reason just had to revolve around child murder. This movie is nothing but a crude act of vandalism that completely misses the mark of both Alien and Predator. It strips the original Alien of its deeper layers in a way that reveals a lot more about the people making it than it probably intended.
Because now I know who ordered the sausage lovers.
Doesn't finish any of its fucking subplots.
But this isn't for our world, is it, Miss Yutani?
And the whole thing is too dark to make out what's going on anyway. Since you can barely see the carnage, AVP Requiem might as well not even have the license. It takes two of cinema's best designed creatures and puts them in the dark, trivializing them as if they were any old B-movie garbage.
That ain't right!
So it's unwatchable in every sense of the word, and killed what should have been a slam dunk series, but the potential remains, and I certainly hope it's revisited one day, but in competent hands.
Take it down a notch.
Number 19. Long ago in ancient times, crows and ravens were known among the superstitious as birds of bad omen, whose caucuses of croaking garrulity would signify a coming calamity. Even today, in some parts of the world, that legend strongly lingers. Only instead of the presence of crows, it's Emilia Clarke and Jai Courtney, two of the shittest actors working today.
You know who I am?
You were sent to protect me by John Connor, the leader of the Resistance.
I don't understand. You can't know any of this.
But I do.
You're both just awful.
Much like how the crow itself is not to blame for the calamity it signals, the failures of Terminator Genisys shouldn't be laid at these two personally. But that said, it's hard to find two purer examples of people hired for their alleged marketability rather than any actual acting prowess. Jai Courtney has the screen presence of a fucking ironing board, and so any intensity associated with Kyle Reese the character is gone with nothing to fill its place. Meanwhile, Emilia Clarke is awful. Her tendency to over-enunciate every line is something that's always impeded her acting, but it warrants calling out here especially, not just because it's insufferable, but because Sarah Connor was never her character to ruin.
Come with me if you want to live! Now, soldier!
Awful.
When classics turn franchise, icons of Sarah Connor's stature become mantles to be passed down and handled respectfully. To pull it off, she must be recognizable as more than just a superficial imitation, while demonstrating an aptitude for character development that justifies the continuation in the first place. And these were depths well beyond these actors. This is not Sarah Connor, this is not Kyle Reese, and Terminator Genisys is not a Terminator film.
I am dead inside.
What makes Genisys the worst Terminator sequel is not just how it retreads the Terminator and Terminator 2 only to turn their respective villains into fucking jobbers, but that everything that follows that is just a slew of random inversions and what-if scenarios. And nobody was asking these questions, such as, what if Sarah Connor was the one who saved Kyle Reese?
Fuck you, asshole.
What if a new T-800 was sent back in time to protect Sarah Connor and his name was Pops?
Pops, please, Pops! No, Pops, no! Pops, no!
Shut up! Oh my god, I don't care!
Or what if the new Terminator disguised himself as Kyle Reese? How would Sarah Connor know which one to shoot?
It's me, Sarah. He's mimicking. Shoot him. I'm Reese. Shoot him.
Oh crap. Well, one of us is gonna have to change.
Unless I'm missing something here, she didn't know who the real Kyle Reese was, but the movie confidently soldiers on as if you should be following. But worst of all is the major twist. John Connor is portrayed by Jason Clarke, and perhaps owing to the severe lack of competition, he is far and away the best actor in the movie. Despite how key his role is in the Terminator universe at large, we've never actually had a great depiction so far, but what's here appears to match the legend as we know it. John Connor is assertive and resourceful, but doesn't neglect to lighten the tension from time to time. He's affable, believable, and well-groomed to be humanity's last hero, and he's a Terminator. What if John Connor was a Terminator is a thought exercise so feverishly stupid it's one step removed from your average Rob Schneider pitch.
Rob Schneider is a stapler, and he's about to find out that being a stapler is harder than it looks. Rob Schneider is the stapler, rated PG-13.
It's not just that it's a bad twist, it has to be the series' worst conceivable twist, because the entire, and I mean the entire premise of Terminator is that if Skynet can destroy John Connor, then humanity is lost forever. And so how is there even a story now that the machines have achieved their primary mission off-screen? It also undercuts the one genuinely fresh offering of Kyle Reese, Sarah Connor, and John Connor sharing the screen together for the first time. This should mean something, but since this isn't really John Connor, it just doesn't mean anything. Terminator Genisys may hit the beats of the first two movies, but it becomes so convoluted to the point that its entire story is impenetrable, and is simply too noisy to watch as some dumb fun. For how it shamelessly bastardized the classics only to retell them in a more confusing way, it's impossible to recommend ahead of simply rewatching the ones that it's pretending to be.
Just awful.
Number 18. It's no secret that these three franchises have all been coasting off the success of their respective first one or two movies. Many of the sequels are outright lazy, but it's all these lazier efforts that also accentuates people's appetites for something more substantive. There always remains that glimmer of hope that a sequel or prequel will one day come along to do justice to the lore. And in 2012, there was indeed what appeared to be a real concerted effort to deliver something really special and original with Prometheus, a movie that actively invokes humanity's biggest questions about our place in the universe, and then offers absolutely no closure.
Don't waste my motherfucking time!
Prometheus is a puddle clouded with muddy water to appear as if it's deep. It had everything going for it. The visuals are stunning, the cast is stacked, and the creators deliberately chose not to bank on the alien name for recognition, which was a respectable declaration of its ambitions. But for something like that to be successful, especially in science fiction, it has to evoke wonder and curiosity in the viewer. And this was made unnecessarily challenging because all of its grand ideas were expressed vicariously through this group of total fucking spanners.
Hey, don't open that! It's an alien planet! Is there air? You don't know!
I have rarely hated characters as much as this. Not only is their stupidity diametrically opposed to how intelligent they're presented as, being doctors, space explorers, and practitioners of faith, but they all lack even the most rudimentary of survival skills, or really any kind of common sense. There are geographers who get lost, expeditionists who pet violent space cobras,
Hey, little fella!
and a character who's crushed to death because they didn't simply move to one side.
Watch out! Watch out!
When characters are this dumb, all the would-be tension feels manufactured and none of the drama feels real. But when they're meant to be smart on top of that, that's when it feels like the movie is insulting your intelligence.
Bravo, man, I ain't going nowhere.
The wildest thing about it is that it was helmed by none other than Ridley Scott himself, director of not only the original Alien, but also Blade Runner, which successfully explored the similar motif of what it is to be human and remains highly respected among cinephiles to this day.
You were made as well as we could make you, but not to last.
So it's hard to imagine this was made by the same person. Prometheus wanted very badly to traffic in similar themes of creator versus creation, only to conclude with a giant octopus baby forcing itself on some kind of milk-fed gimp.
Ugh. Brother, ugh. What's that? What's that, brother?
For context, our main character is Elizabeth Shaw, and she makes the discovery that all life as we know it was created by the engineers, and so begins an expedition to hopefully find the answers as to why we are here. One of her traits is that she cannot bear children, and it's this circumstance that informs her faith in God, as well as her concurrent fascination with our creators. However, the engineers prove hostile and wish to destroy mankind without granting them the closure they seek. Shaw, in an ironic twist of fate, does fall pregnant thanks to a mysterious black goo I am absolutely not going to try to interpret, since it does literally anything the plot requires it to, and she births a horrific alien creature. So the creator killed its creations, until the creation's creation killed its creator. And with everybody else now dead, Shaw continues her travels, looking for answers. I don't even know what to fucking say. It's one thing to be ambitious, but ambition alone is no excuse for making absolutely no sense. What I resent most about it is the implication that its themes are complex enough to warrant repeat viewings, and with it the implicit promise that if you watch it enough times, you'll eventually get it. But no matter how often I see it, I come away wondering what exactly this hentai fever dream is supposed to reveal to us about the nature of the universe. This, like everything else in the movie, doesn't provoke thought so much as ambivalence and frustration.
Sometimes to create, you first must destroy. You know whose line that was? Joe Stalin.
They say when Ridley Scott makes a movie, God flips a coin, and in the case of Prometheus, he too was the creator who destroyed his own creation, and we'll never learn the answers as to why. Prometheus should have had an outstanding legacy alongside Alien, but now it's just that one movie that contains some of the dumbest smart characters in recent memory, and it's a damn shame. Worse than that though, it was a lost chance to inform the industry on how to course correct when franchises like these go astray. But for being as incomprehensible as it is, it likely set back these kinds of riskier projects, and future sequels will suffer as a result. I guess the lesson is that an audience should only have to consider a movie's deeper implications as long as the creators do their due diligence as well. And Prometheus's events and characters are so haphazardly thrown together, it just isn't worth the mental strain it takes to try to disentangle and make any sense of it. It's just a waste of time.
Amazing what you can bullshit as you go along.
Number 17.
My name is Elizabeth Shaw, last survivor of the Prometheus. And I'm still searching.
That bitch is dead.
Nothing more accurately conveys the sorry state of Alien prequels as the sight of Shaw's dead body laying absolutely gutted. Prometheus understandably suffered quite the backlash for attempting to marry a series of unfettered philosophical musings with the Alien franchise only minus the alien, but this didn't stop director Ridley Scott from forcibly inserting a second finger anyway.
I'll do the fingering.
David, here it is.
It's hard to tell really what level of bitterness Alien Covenant is operating under. On the one hand, it is a direct follow-up to Prometheus, ignoring the backlash, and opening cold with villains Wayland and David continuing their discussion on life, legacy, and creation. But on the other hand, it relegates all of the previous film's setups to an unceremonious genocide and an off-screen death of the main character, meaning for fans of Prometheus out there, Covenant just casually killed off any remaining story threads in exchange for a generic slasher.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
On paper, it still could have been good. Covenant combines the controlled threat of a defective android with delusions of grandeur, and the unpredictability of a loose monster indiscriminately picking people apart through what is essentially a haunted house. This isn't far off what made the original so compelling, and why you'd think a movie clearly torn between two different identities like this would be more fascinating to dissect. It's just fucking
boring!
Covenant may well have scaled back from the heights of Prometheus, but it's still just as pretentious and routine. A group of colonists intercept a rogue transmission, they land on a planet to collect their Darwin Awards, and then they encounter David. He's isolated and insane, manipulating the crew to host his creations, the Xenomorph, which he created.
Is this a show? This is excuse me, is this a show?
This would be like having a prequel to Jaws that explains how the shark got its teeth. Both Covenant and Prometheus purported to tackle big existential themes, but then struggled to work out how to properly tie that in to the alien mythos.
And it exploded.
And apparently Ridley Scott had forgotten that Alien was already layered with an existential theme of sorts, thanks largely to the dread-inducing design of the Xenomorph itself. It's not a series that ever required this detour into existentialism because it was already achieving enough. You need only take a look at Alejandro Jodorowsky's Unmade Dune adaptation to see that H.R. Giger, original designer of the Xenomorph, had had these concepts percolating for some years, and only when placed in conjunction with Stan Winston's masterful practical effects, monster movie history was made. Covenant looks as though it attempts to win back audiences by tributing Giger, as seen in the background dressing that references his unused designs, but it's hard to take these tributes as sincere when the movie also displays the Xenomorph in broad daylight and with shoddy CGI.
Ran off into the night.
So while Prometheus was a good-looking bad movie, Covenant is a bad-looking bad movie. The only real point of interest to Covenant is how it was a victim of Prometheus's poor reception. In the era of social media and instant reactions, where the thinnest and most extreme takes can garner the most traction, it's all too tempting for a studio to look at how savage their film is critically and change course for the sequel. And in the decades now of online discourse, there has been precisely one account of reactionaries by way of mass hysteria altering a film for the better.
Meow. What are you?
But this is the exception that proves the rule. Changing things as drastic as the main character and the central antagonists is a pretty telling lack of conviction, and had there been a real impassioned story being told here, they would have had enough backbone to withstand the backlash. Covenant's jerky motions back towards its alien roots all but confirmed that this was a story comprised of ideas, and none of the ideas were cooked properly. At the end of the day, Prometheus and Alien are just two separate stories, and this is a misguided duology that ties them together with superficial imagery, but nothing else. Number 16. When Terminator 2 released in 1991, it set a new benchmark for greatest sequels in all of cinema. Around the same time, Predator 2 and Alien 3 were veering more into experimental territory, shaking up the foundations with different settings and tones. But as admirable as these attempts were, they just couldn't achieve the same level of impact, and the shadow of Terminator 2 prominently loomed over even to this day.
Hello, cutie pie.
By the time a new sequel was sanctioned, the studios elected to scale back on creativity in favor of repeating a safe formula.
Back to formula.
The result was Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, a movie-watching experience akin to listening to your drunk mate relay the whole of Terminator 2 from memory, while throwing in a few ill-timed jokes and generally fucking up all the nuance.
You fucking prats.
Terminator 3 is derivative of Terminator 2 to the point that it feels like an earlier draft was dug up and put to screen. The best one-to-one comparison I can make is that it's what Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex was to Crash Bandicoot 3, where it's impossible to talk about the inferior sequel without making direct comparisons. Rewatching both of them reveals how extra background details you may not catch the first time can make or break the immersion. In Terminator 2, you can spot the T-800 quietly standing guard and scouting the perimeter like a surveillance camera. It isn't overt, but it's a neat consideration. In Terminator 3, the T-850, which is different in name only, covers its face with its hands to protect itself, as if it forgot that it's a Terminator. So despite their similar features, these movies are not built the same. And the few instances it does veer in its own direction, it does so for the worst.
Talk to the hand.
Just satisfying to me as Cumming is.
Namely with its main character, John Connor. I don't know how else to say this, but this John Connor would make this John Connor cry.
Is that all you got, pussy?
In the decade separating the films, both in universe and out, John Connor went from a brash delinquent that nevertheless showed latent traits of leadership to a whinging junkie that packs a paintball gun. As the protagonist, he's supposed to be our perspective character, but with no new ground being broken with Terminator 3, it only feels like he's catching up to the rest of us.
I've got a peer-reviewed study right here that says you're a pussy.
And what doesn't help is how he's more of the stunted boy here than the actual boy we knew him as. His first reunion with the Terminator, for example, feels especially empty because the T-850 is visually the same but technically different, while John Connor is visually different but technically the same, and so neither character really feels like who they once were.
Get over here, bitch!
Terminator has always been a somewhat hopeless story, with its continual focus on a looming robot apocalypse, but Terminator 2 contrasted all that foreboding with an optimistic message that there is no fate but what we make. We are free to determine our future for ourselves no matter what, and I believe this more heroic outlook is one of the factors that elevated it to classic status. For Terminator 3 to exist, that message had to be bent around in favor of the assertion that Judgment Day is still inevitable.
Inevitable.
Despite it being delayed.
Evitable.
And it's clear the main motivation there was in churning out an easy sequel with no regard to how it undermines the neatness by which the previous film tied everything up. Among every recycled aspect, there's one new idea briefly explored, which had they fully committed to would have done more to justify the movie. That is the T-850 temporarily becoming the villain. He's reprogrammed with two commands that conflict with one another: protect John Connor and kill John Connor. Pitting these two against each other was a perfect opportunity to supply John Connor with the development needed to transform him into the legend he's destined to be. Making the conscious choice to kill this Terminator, despite its formative impact on him all those years ago, would secure his place as the man who would triumph against the machines, because he'd first have to triumph against himself. And in a trilogy that's fond of closed loops and surprising subversions, it's a move that would have perfectly mirrored the prior two films and save him from this otherwise uncharacteristic regression.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
Instead, the whole idea is dropped as quickly as it began, and he's defeated by the power of friendship.
Friendship. The Terminator wins. Flawless victory.
For some, simply having a lighter version of Terminator 2, replete with a made-for-TV vibe and stock sound effects, is enough. But for failing to propel the story forward in any meaningful way, I don't know why anyone would choose to watch it over the classic it's basing itself on. Terminator 3 is just not up to standard. Yet for being successful, it set the unfortunate precedent that sequels may always safely fall back on what's tried and true and still find success. Judgment Day is inevitable, and with that comes the veiled threat of more Terminator sequels, now and forever.
No. Wait.
Number 15.
On the dashiki, smoking the lick-licky. 10 freaky girls inside the gin tiki. Girl, when you see me, you better believe me. This ain't a game and pimpin' ain't easy. Anything goes when it comes to house. I'm the kingpin when it comes to flows. You better ask someone if you don't know. When you see me, girls say, what up, though? 10 freaky girls. 10 freaky freaky girls.
There's no movie on this list that confuses me quite like Predator 2. The original Predator was set in a Central American jungle, which allowed for the creature to showcase its hunting tactics in appropriately harsh conditions that tested our character's resolve until it finally met its match. It was easy to understand the stakes, the tone, and the progression of events as they unfolded. Predator 2 transfers that setting from the jungle to urban, but I can't help but feel like its own progression of events, and especially its tone, were lost along the way.
Want some candy? Want some candy?
What the fuck am I watching?
The movie starts as it means to carry on. It very slowly bleeds information out on what Predator is, ostensibly drawing us closer and closer to the seedy criminal underworld of LA. I really like this as an idea, as it positions the Oucher as something of a vigilante or anti-hero this time around, as he cleans up the corrupt streets. But with each kill, be they nameless goons, police detectives, or drug kingpins, there doesn't seem to be all that much difference made to the world at large, since everything had already gone to shit long before the movie had started, and nothing changes by its end.
I'm too old for this shit.
Dropping Predator in what would otherwise be just an ordinary, if excessively sweaty, detective story just feels like the Oucher is on vacation and has invaded an episode of Law & Order somewhere.
We got a new player in town.
The whole thing is depicted like it's a mystery of who, among these regular gangland slayings, is committing these extra murders and why. When we already know the answer, what with the big red 2 in the title? All of the victims, though random from the Predator's perspective, happen to be tied to new main character Harrigan, but Harrigan isn't really a foil for the Oucher in the way that all the other protagonists in the series have been before or since. He may be a hard-nosed detective in a city that's fallen from grace, but in the grand scheme of things, he is just some guy. There's nothing to distinguish him from every other foul-mouthed, ill-tempered resident of LA. And so the hierarchy of values the Predators usually abide by seems to be abandoned in favor of something looser and more sporadic, even needlessly spiteful at times. You see it plainly when Harrigan visits the grave of his partner, who was one of the Oucher's first victims, and while he's peacefully mourning, it loiters around just to taunt him. It feels more mean-spirited, even immature, rather than sportsmanlike, and the whole time watching, I couldn't really understand why Harrigan of all people was the one it had chosen to mess with. By the end, he does indeed prove himself worthy as a warrior, but the tone of gritty police procedural never quite melds with Predator turning up as a wildcard before fucking off again.
Bye, Felicia.
I look at Predator 2 and I see a movie where the creators certainly had a unique vision and appear to have executed it as intended. It just wasn't a vision I think I ever fully understood, and I could never work out just how serious or self-aware it was meant to be. I'm all for broadening the landscape like this, but Predator 2 is a movie I just don't enjoy, even among all the positive developments that I can still recognize and for which it still deserves credit. For example, it manages to integrate features of the Oucher first popularized by the comic series, like the spear, the net, and the disc, and by canonizing these expansions to the lore, it successfully brought them up to a level where they're as closely associated with the creature as anything found in the first movie, like the invisibility or the heat vision. These are strong developments that any self-respecting sequel should aspire towards, and additional Easter eggs like the xenomorph skull at the end also demonstrate it as a labor of affection. So there's a lot of merit to Predator 2, it's just that there are just as many optics I don't really get either. The tone resembles a Lethal Weapon movie minus the irreverence and the tongue-in-cheek humour, plus the camp of having scenes like when the Oucher is visibly scared of falling off a building one moment, then gets caught fucking around in some old couple's bathroom the next. Gary Busey, as the eccentric government agent he probably is in real life, is killed in a way that suggests some off-screen falling out and hasty editing to account for perhaps his firing, but it leads to a death where his legs fall down without the rest of his body. This is cartoon logic. Meanwhile, the other half of the movie builds up the ominous presence of King Willie, setting up a big showdown of some kind only to immediately kill him off screen, and all the gang-affiliated slayings of which he's a major part don't ever really come up again.
Oh my god, it's a slaughterhouse.
I really do give Predator 2 props overall for confidently striving to be its own thing and bring its own flavour to the franchise, when it could have easily rehashed the original, and I can certainly see why there's a fan base for this one, but ultimately it's just not for me. I wonder if it fares better watching it separate from the context of the first movie as an alternate origin point of Predator, rather than a direct sequel, because this feels like a reset rather than a true continuation, and as much as I've tried to understand and enjoy it, I just don't really get it. I hope you enjoy it more than I did.
This is a new dance, and it's called Predator.
Number 14. For all the prestige that Alien and Aliens have rightly received, strangely enough it's the much maligned and highly polarizing Alien 3 that has the series' most iconic image. And it really is something. Series protagonist Ripley is finally cornered up close by a xenomorph with no means of escape, but she survives this encounter by virtue of being a host to an alien queen herself. And therein lies the problem. As soon as the movie had begun, Ripley was given a death sentence, and then everything from there is done to ensure the maximum possible suffering before the inevitable.
Got him!
It opens with Ripley fresh off her victory against the Xenomorph Queen, crash landing on a prison planet full of hardened criminals, where Hicks and Newt, the other survivors of Aliens, die.
Sad. So sad.
They die violently and unceremoniously, and her remaining time is spent battling one final xenomorph that had made its way onto their ship, and will now terrorize her in an isolated facility that houses no weapons.
Shit.
She must also grieve her surrogate daughter, resist outright assault from the sex-starved inmates, and even dare to kindle a doomed romance with Clemens, a man who gets annihilated right in front of her, directly leading to the infamous shot. This was David Fincher's directorial debut, and though he would go on to publicly disown the film thanks to the excessive executive meddling, what is salvageable from the final product was no doubt his influence.
Country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
He quickly demonstrated a natural eye for shot composition, and despite or perhaps even because of the bleak context, this one shot ascended to a level of cinematic history far above the actual film from where it came. It's impressive work, but it's a wonder if it was worth it given the steps taken to get to this point. Alien 3 feels like a nightmare. The prisoners are repenting for their crimes, and as such, have turned religious zealots to contrast the xenomorph's reimagining as more demon than creature.
Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
And this is something I actually love about Alien 3. Ripley is in hell, and there's a demon afoot. Since the xenomorph design is already rife with demonic imagery, this third chapter could have offered a religious interpretation to offset the scientific and militaristic filters applied to the original two, allowing Alien 3 to distinguish itself before closing out Ripley's story for good. It really had the makings of one of the best trilogies of all time, but Alien 3 is not without sin, and its biggest by far was in how it traded out horror in exchange for dread.
What we really need to do is create a powerful sense of dread. See, the longer the note, the more dread.
God, that's terrible.
The movie is simply too futile, so much so that after 2 hours you can't help but disengage from the sheer numbness. What starts bleak turns into a constant meditation on death and faith, and with it an onslaught of sermons that never seem to stop. Ripley is a tragic character to be sure, but she was never one who deserved all of this, and with the endless possibilities that came from a follow-up to Aliens, it's hard to conclude that what we got was the best of possible outcomes. It just feels like one big gut punch. Even by its end, Bishop, a face that Ripley had come around to trusting, reveals himself as yet another antagonistic force, manipulating things behind the scenes, and she's left with a futile choice, either give up or die. And so Ripley does the noble thing and sacrifices herself, purging the existence of the last of the xenomorphs. Just 1 year prior, Terminator 2 ended in a similar way, and so putting the two endings side by side makes a clear set of case studies in just how much of a difference tone can make.
They're the same picture.
It's the same scene, but where the heroic sacrifice in Terminator 2 was a moment of tragedy amongst a triumph, Alien 3 doesn't draw out the same complexity of emotions because by this point, like Ripley, you're just worn down.
Oh, thank God.
There were some great ideas in Alien 3, and an argument could be made that the lingering sense of nihilism and hopelessness is on brand for an Alien film, given how unambiguously evil the xenomorph is. But the issues run further than just its direction. The new rotoscoping effects were abysmal, and looked markedly worse than the practical effects of the prior two films. Other experimental choices, like the one to include alien POV for a creature with no eyes, revealed that Alien 3 was made less with a vision and more for a deadline.
Surprise, motherfucker!
And the cult-like institution essentially hindered the supporting characters from standing out as individuals, making the decision to kill off Clemens, one of the only characters whose backstory is really fleshed out, even more of a wasted opportunity among wasted opportunities. And that's the core issue with Alien 3. There are just too many other things it could have been. Perhaps the xenomorph could have landed on Earth, as was originally pitched and even teased for audiences. And this would have been a natural progression of events. The first is a chance encounter, the second takes the fight back to the alien's planet, and the finale brings it back back home. But the Alien 3 that we got proves a lot more satisfying to discuss than to actually watch. More than anything, it's a cautionary tale with flickers of greatness, and I do encourage people to see it and decide for themselves. But every time I do, I can't help but lament what we should have had instead. It's just a bit too raw.
Fuck!
Number 13. Terminator Dark Fate is in a lot of ways Terminator 3 2. It picks up where the story of Terminator 2 left off, it co-ops many of that film's successful beats, and it's a massive piece of shit.
Boom. Roasted.
The gimmick this time is that the new Terminator, the Rev 9, is a blend of the endoskeleton from the Terminator and the liquid metal alloy from Terminator 2, which in a sense represents the film as a whole, combines the elements that worked before and leaves it at that, neglecting all the possibilities that come from essentially having two Terminators in one.
Oh yes, Daddy.
Linda Hamilton also reprises her role as Sarah Connor after 30 years, and for some reason rocks up to the action looking like Stephen King.
I'll be back.
And while this was ostensibly a cause for rejoice, Dark Fate is yet another in the tedious trend of raking up old actors to return to their most prominent role, only jaded and broken to the point where no trace of their actual character or spirit remains.
And I drink till I black out.
This is not the worst case of character assassination out there, it's not even the worst case in this film, but it's repugnant all the same. It shouldn't have to be said, but the Sarah Connor of old never had any doubt whatsoever about the importance of her own role in raising the future leader of the Resistance, and John Connor could never have become the man he needed to be without her direct influence and guidance. Even when Skynet reigned in the apocalypse, her own story was the stuff of legends. So seeing her now as this snarky alcoholic and reducing herself, in her own words, to nothing but a womb,
it's your womb,
is an unwelcome mark of triviality from these new creators, and one that falls right in line with the recent and utterly cancerous trope of the hero turned cynical wash-up for no other reason than to traffic in an identical replacement.
Lots of people assassinate characters.
Lots of cunts.
The question is, how did Sarah Connor get here?
What? What are you thinking?
I remember the one positive people drew at the time of release was how impressive the de-aging effects were in the opening, but with the explosive rise and instant accessibility of AI-generated content, this scene aged like fucking milk. I think the reason why killing off major heroes to artificially prop up new ones is so indefensible, besides it inherently being in poor taste to vandalize a great piece of work that wasn't yours, is that there have been exactly zero accounts of it ever being accepted or embraced. It's just a brain-dead idea, both in theory and execution, and Danny, John's replacement, might well be the biggest non-entity in this movie.
Well, fuck fate.
She does absolutely nothing of note for the whole runtime, and it's shocking that she wasn't able to distinguish herself, given that she's surrounded by three characters who all serve the exact same function: protect Danny, kill Terminators. And speaking of Terminators,
I'm Carl. I'm never gonna fucking call you Carl.
Carl does not work, because the more you add to this kind of archetype, the more you're really taking away. Terminators function optimally as one-dimensional. They're not designed to be fully fleshed out in of themselves, but rather to test others' convictions in the face of fear and incite their growth. Adding too many of these kinds of extraneous details isn't development, it's just turning the Terminator into something that it isn't.
She appreciated that they could change diapers efficiently and without any complaints. I am a very good listener, and I'm extremely funny.
Why are you the way that you are?
And we already had this kind of role fulfilled by Grace, the cybernetically enhanced human sent back in time. So we have at least one good guy too many, and we're short one bad guy as advertised. And none of these decisions were for the betterment of the film. Even with its faulty premise, the movie lost an opportunity to deliver an earnest scene for which it was very much searching. Sarah laments not keeping a hold of pictures of John because now she forgets his face. Meanwhile, Carl is appealing to her as a changed man with his own new positive self-identity.
Happy birthday, dear Lulu.
She understands remains unconvinced. What they missed here was that as John's assassin, Carl very likely had every image of the two of them together ever taken, and is now the only repository of this information left. Showing these to her, having thought they were gone forever, could have granted her the closure she thought was impossible to ever achieve. It would reignite her fight while proving his remorse, and could be effectively pulled off through images alone without a single word of dialogue needed. All there was to show for this resolution was Carl's sacrifice at the end.
A charm.
But when it's being penned by the same people who thought casually killing John off like this was appropriate, the sentiment rings hollow and is obviously insincere.
Oh,
his fate.
It's also hard to ignore the diminishing returns of the T-800's self-sacrifice when you realize this is the 4th time it's happened. It's even harder to ignore the parallels between Skynet's attempt at killing John Connor and rewriting history, and Terminator sequels traversing back to the well of Terminator 2 to undermine and supplant its impact. The compulsion to desecrate Terminator 2 in increasingly bad faith ways, while also trying to be exactly like it, isn't going to go unpunished forever. Separated from the franchise, Dark Fate is just a generic action movie, but as a Terminator sequel, it's the cinematic equivalent of Stolen Valor, and here's hoping that its staggering loss of over $100 million will finally shake these studios out of this trend, forcing them to readjust their broken values. Forcing them to readjust their broken values and pave the way for more inspired entries that focus on expansion rather than erasure.
Not so loud, okay?
Number 12. By the early 2000s, both Alien and Predator had been kept afloat mostly by external media, such as graphic novels and video games, and it felt for a while as though the two creatures were prevalent pretty much anywhere other than the actual medium from where they began. Alien had been experimenting with both darker and lighter iterations in Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, with neither sustaining much fanfare. Meanwhile, Predator had only made it to one sequel before being quietly shelved for a hiatus that would turn into 20 years. So with nothing left to lose, the studios must have thought, fuck it, and fast-tracked a movie that had the unique honor of bearing the double stigma of the crossover gimmick and the video game adaptation. AVP Alien vs. Predator unfortunately did very little to dispel the poor reputation of either. The movie is passable but lacks imagination. It was obviously an exasperated admission from Fox that they were fresh out of ideas for either franchise, and even with a bar as low as this, AVP only barely cleared it.
I will end you.
It's a product that somehow everybody felt disappointed by, but also owned a copy of on DVD. Such was the strength of the novelty alone. AVP is more in line with its arcade game origins rather than anything resembling either the Alien or Predator film classics. Its plot centers around an ancient lore where a group of predators must travel to an underground pyramid in Antarctica to conduct ritualistic combat trials against aliens as a rite of passage. Meanwhile, all of our human characters, whose traits literally begin and end with accent or haircut, wander through unknowingly serving themselves up as walking incubators.
It's an egg.
It is incredibly thin, but to give it credit, it never pretends to be anything more. The first act is build up, but sadly no real suspense. The second act has the Oucher arriving just as the xenomorph eggs pop up and incubate within seconds, inciting the action. And finally, the turn of the third act makes good on its premise, producing a fight sequence between the titular monsters, bookended by two money shots so palpably sick that cinephiles across the world were forced into an existential crisis for secretly loving it.
I'm very aroused.
Say what you will about the whole package, it's indeed very hollow and amateurishly executed, but they fucking delivered on its most crucial scene.
Why are you all wet, baby?
With such a wealth of storylines that depict variations of this exact conflict, it shouldn't be too hard a concept to adapt and make work. This first attempt provided something of a base, before Requiem came along and absolutely flattened any interest in continuing. But if the rich legacy of the games and comics are anything to go by, the dichotomy between these two, being the ultimate predator versus the ultimate prey, will continue to thrive. It is still one of the sharpest and most popular crossovers in modern fiction, and as creatures that got their start in cinema, it's only natural that they one day be permitted to return to the silver screen in more glorious fashion than this. If that day ever comes. One thing I hope is carried over and expanded on is how AVP manages to differentiate its main creatures, which is never easy considering their likeness to one another. There's Scar, the Oucher who marks himself with the acid blood of the xenomorph he kills, earning his stripes, and there's Grid, the xenomorph who bears the grid-like markings it receives from the Oucher's net before killing it. These were minor cosmetic touches, but they still amounted to effective and economic storytelling, especially for how they were all largely achieved without dialogue. If a studio ever felt really ambitious, they could drop the flat human characters entirely and make a silent throwback in the same vein as the Red Turtle, but that's a discussion for another time. Ultimately, AVP is undercooked, and what flashes of brilliance there are were all either incidental or novel. God, I love being a turtle! It It was a back-pocket premise executed hastily and somewhat desperately by a studio hire in the hopes of parlaying the success of the originals into more merchandising opportunities. The result was cheap, and since its release, it never really found a place on its own merits. Its biggest point of contention at the time was its PG-13 rating, as this was accompanied with the spectre of compromise to have these two legendary horror icons resort to bloodless violence. The bigger point of contention now, 20 years on, is that it just looks like a glorified fan film, and someone committed enough could likely produce something better with not much less. AVP may not be an intelligent movie, but it doesn't insult your intelligence. Where it's lacking in substance, there's also no dreariness, no pontification, and no fingering.
I'll do the fingering.
Placing it at the complete opposite end of the spectrum to something like Terminator Genisys or Prometheus. With those movies, it felt as though I'd come into them halfway through when I hadn't, whereas AVP is a popcorn experience so shallow and basic that you could enter at literally any point and still be able to follow what's happening. It may not sound like much, but I know which one I would take every single time. And also being explicitly non-canon, I can admire it as the throwaway entertainment it was always intended as, one that doesn't actively harm the sagas from which they're a part. I just hope one day somebody takes the premise, embraces its full potential, and delivers the Alien vs Predator we all deserve. Number 11. We've now reached a batch that are this high up partly by virtue of their unsung quality, but more because their vices are only marginally less intolerable than what's come before. A lot of these entries now exist in their own bubble, having tried to pivot the franchises away from their horror roots in pursuit of a broader audience. As such, many of them are heavily diluted, but as far as trashy popcorn entertainment is concerned, they still hit their main assignment of monster movie mayhem. Under the right lens, they can be dumb fun, and the first of these was 1997's Alien Resurrection.
What a fag.
Alien Resurrection is a pretty awkward addendum to the original trilogy, but has a self-assuredness about it that embraces the absurdity of its own existence. Set 200 years in the future, far enough from the established timeline so as to not have any significant ripple effect on any continuity, it's a more comic bookish spin on the mythos that drifts well into darkly camp territory. It also shoehorns in Sigourney Weaver as Ripley in her final on-screen appearance.
Look, it's stupid, but I'm gonna do it, okay?
Because despite the jump in the timeline and her very overt death in Alien 3, bringing her back as the main character was an impulse the franchise felt compelled to satisfy. However, this is Ripley in name only. Ripley 8 is a clone genetically crossed with a xenomorph queen, giving her all of the strengths and none of the weaknesses. The qualities already associated with the character, like her courage and low tolerance for bullshit, have been artificially ramped up to the point of goddess-like omniscience, as if she's Deadpool or something. And equipped with that knowledge, she spends the majority of the movie doing whatever the fuck she wants, like messing with this ragtag group of mercenaries and thirsting after their lesbian android. Her newfound sexual appetite culminates in what can only be described as a xenomorph orgy with live commentary, and I don't really know how else to unpack that, but that's all you need to know if this is worth a shot.
So, who do I have to fuck to get off this boat?
What? If Ripley 8's insatiable lust didn't make it clear, Resurrection is 100% shameless fanfiction, an all-around quite a tacky experience. It's replete with the common hallmarks of late 90s cheese and poorly aged CGI, nevertheless it's still more palatable than the overtly dour and self-serious entries that immediately preceded and followed. And on the other side of Ripley 8 are the Xenomorphs, whose redesigns deserve the most commendation.
You think you can just up and run away? You crazy.
Here they're practically drenched, looking more tactile than ever, and the frozen breath that drapes over their silver metallic teeth likens them to some kind of demonic ice dragon that bleeds acid.
Death metal.
Up until this point, they've acted in accordance with bugs and parasites, but in Resurrection they're depicted more like wild beasts, capable of behavioral conditioning, tactical self-preservation, and synchronized swimming. You can see it in effect with how they learn to anticipate the cryo-freeze button as a threat,
Clever girl,
and then use the button itself on their captor. Or how they gang up on and kill one of their own, using its acid blood to breach the floor and make their escape.
Oh, now, wait a minute. Stop. Not so fast, y'all.
The creature design has barely undergone any major refinements over the years because truthfully it never needed it, but Alien Resurrection layered in these additional instincts for the xenomorph without turning it into something else entirely. It's a well-measured development that's often overlooked and deserves recognition.
I like to eat people from other planets.
So between Ripley, the aliens, and the new tongue-in-cheek approach, the movie was lined up to become something of a dark horse entry. However, even apologists would admit that it loses credibility by its climax. This was the first Alien movie to introduce the concept of a human xenomorph hybrid, not just in Ripley 8, but the newborn, which as you can see looks like a decrepit naked grandma who forgot her bath towel. I get that a creature like this is a logical next step of sorts, but that compulsion to escalate the stakes with a substitute design is really the Achilles heel of this franchise, because whatever they create will always feel like a downgrade from the xenomorph in its purest form, and at any rate this was almost certainly not what anyone had envisioned it looking like in execution. Resurrection was the first to try this, and unfortunately that's all it took for any goodwill the movie had built to get sucked out into the vacuum of space.
Oh no! I know!
If we're generous, we could label this movie as experimental, but to be honest it comes across equally as a paycheck job for just about everyone involved, and part of the fun of watching it is suspecting that nobody really gave a shit.
Fork.
Fuck.
It's fork.
It seems like the creatives were just using it as a stepping stone to get wherever they needed to go, and fair play. For example, director Jean-Pierre Jeunet is nothing if not indulgent, and produces an unmistakable flair here, traits of which would heavily inform his next project Amelie, which went on to become his most famous and successful film. Then The Space Thieves, as written by Joss Whedon, serve as something of a progenitor to the crew of Firefly. You can see a kernel of the same dynamic among this group, only they're much scummier and not nearly as easy to root for. So perhaps to refine the characters of Firefly, he first needed to explore them in this world before excising the grungier aspects. And then there's Sigourney Weaver herself, who took a chance to revisit Ripley one last time to give us some well-earned reprieve from Alien 3, by essentially playing Dungeon Master in her own campaign. Alien Resurrection may well be disposable, but it's rarely dull, its tone will prove divisive, and it's hampered by its weak ending, but it has a bizarre edge to it that helps it stand out, and it's one that may be worth revisiting from time to time, even if we don't fully understand why.
Smoke weed every day.
Number 10. The further a studio franchise is past its peak, the safer its newer entries tend to play things, favouring only the lightest of innovations for fear of betraying the formula and by extension the fanbase. These usually consist of a rehashed story, a suggestive subtitle of implicit meaning only, and references to famous set pieces, characters or lines minus the appropriate context. And the latest of these from the Alien franchise is Alien Romulus, a movie designed for committee if there ever was one.
That's a metaphor!
Romulus begins as Don't Breathe crossed with Alien Isolation, concludes as Alien Resurrection crossed with Prometheus, all the while peppering in the original Alien trilogy throughout. Save for one or two developments, such as the facehuggers taking the spotlight, the new step in the xenomorph life cycle, and the welcome return to practical monster effects, anything else positive that can be recollected from Romulus can be directly traced to any other Alien film, for better or worse. Those minor touches, few and far between as they are, were good for expanding the lore without ever breaking canon, but whenever the movie has the guts to tread into new territory like this, it inexplicably cuts the tension short, which in the horror genre is a huge oversight. For example, entering the third act, the characters use pulse rifles on the last xenomorphs, only their guns are set to auto-aim, all but guaranteeing no tension. But then they have to traverse through zero gravity while being blocked by an expanding pool of acid blood. This showed great presence of mind, reincorporating the threat of the acid blood, which we've known since the first film, but in a brand new way. It shows exactly what a sequel like this could deliver, but then the characters just sort of move around it, and it suddenly poses no danger despite veering towards the hull of the spaceship. It's equally as deflating as a prior scene where the characters have to stealth their way through a room full of facehuggers, which is really effective until they break their silence almost immediately into no apparent consequence.
Okay. Please.
The needle with the red button. There's a key to life.
Get off the fucking phone!
Every time Romulus appears to take a step forward, it pivots backwards, and if only it had more conviction in its own innovations, it would have fared far better in the long run. But these are just the reasons why the movie fell short of its potential. What's far less forgivable is how obnoxiously it indulged in some of its references to classic lines from Alien and Aliens.
I can't lie about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
What? So what?
I prefer the term artificial person myself.
No, don't like that.
This is Rain Carradine, last survivor of the Corbellin. Signing off.
What the fuck does that even mean?
Get away from her. You bitch.
I command you to stop.
That final one being especially atrocious. The absolute last thing a legacy sequel like this should be doing is breaking whatever immersion it can muster on its own merits to remind us of two significantly better films we could be watching instead. What's challenging about critiquing these types of movies is that the mixing of multiple sources gives the illusion of freshness, which leads to watchability, when on reflection they have all the depth of your average highlight reel. It makes her a film that may well be recommended for some, but also inherently cynical for being comprised of enough targeted and familiar imagery, only to be dropped from collective memory within a few months. And that's exactly what happened here. Romulus is competent but gutless, and everything it has to deliver can be gleaned from the first viewing. The story is set between the first two films, and in order to contrive its own series of events, it takes a handful of key players from Alien just so it can reduce them to plot points. It starts by casually dropping that the original xenomorph survived its final encounter with Ripley, was captured, and then tore apart an entirely different spaceship off-screen before dying again. All of that was just to get to our new main characters on a ship with xenomorphs, when no explanation was necessary, least of all such an elaborate and wasteful retcon. It's here they also meet Rook, who is a proxy of Ash from the original Alien, resurrecting the late Ian home through modern technology.
Hey, Team America!
This practice has sparked strikes and controversies even as recently as 2024, the very year Romulus came out, and it's a debate that won't settle anytime soon as the technology only becomes more and more prevalent and sophisticated. But irrespective of your personal take on the matter, Romulus did this discussion no favours.
What the fuck is that?
This looks absolutely horrendous, and is a disheartening desecration of a well-regarded actor who deserved better. All of these inclusions were entirely self-serving. Rook could have easily been replaced by Andy, a fellow android who, after receiving an upgrade to get the characters out of a jam, switches from believably downtrodden and mulling over his looming decommission to a calculating puppet of the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and potential foil. They already had something compelling here with their own original character, and the actor does a standout job selling the switch and ramping up the tension, but they opted to include Rook anyway because in their mind proximity equals legitimacy.
Prometheus fire. A divine gift to humanity.
Alright, don't break an arm jerking yourself off.
Romulus reminds me of the quote, "Your need for acceptance can make you invisible." It may have been successful in hacking apart all the expected elements that would go into an Alien film and then remixing them in a coherent and digestible manner. But in trying so hard to align itself with the greats, it didn't forge its own identity. Instead, it strained credulity by recycling classic lines blatantly out of context and undermined its own original offerings to no discernible benefit. So while it's one of the more technically functional and better looking entries, minus the uncanny valley effects, it's really a dire representative of franchising in the modern era, and probably fares better the further its experience from the actual Alien movies it's trying to be.
Robo bitch.
Number 9.
The new movie, the reviewers are calling it everything from shit to fucking shit. Doesn't that look like the worst thing ever?
In 1888, French inventor Louis Le Prince created what is believed to be the oldest surviving motion picture. It's called the Round Hay Garden Scene, and it's only 2 seconds long. But with that one invention came the limitless potential for a brand new art form to come forward and flourish in ways we could only imagine. And 130 years on, Shane Black used that medium to tell the story of a predator's quest to weaponize autism.
Is he joking?
That's right, much like how Doom 2005 had our characters weaponizing extra chromosomes to make them superhuman. Well, Doom walked so the Predator could run. While Hollywood's depiction of debilitating conditions has always been at best tone deaf, reducing autism to a MacGuffin to combat climate change is a pretty shambolic marriage of ideas.
That's not real, is it?
I'm sure Le Prince is spinning in his grave somewhere, having never imagined anyone would willingly put something so fucking absurd on the silver screen. But that said, I like it.
I like it. Are you kidding?
Let me be clear, the Predator is a hot mess. It's crude, immature, and I'm certainly not expecting to sway anybody to its side given the catastrophic reception it received. However, when I first saw it, I went in expecting something in the same vein as Shane Black's other violent comedies, such as Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and The Nice Guys, which are absolute bangers.
I'm playing a little game called Am I Bluffing? Where is the girl?
What did you just do?
I put in one bullet, didn't I?
You put a live round in that gun.
Oh, yeah, there was like an 8% chance. Wasn't it just 8?
8?
Yeah.
Who taught you math?
Give me your left arm. This one.
No.
Yeah, come on.
No. No.
Right, look, when you're talking to your doctor, just tell him you have a spiral fracture of the left radius.
No. No.
Deep breath.
No.
So with that in mind, I assumed The Predator was just that, a comedy. Perhaps I'd be saying a different story had I taken it more seriously from the get-go like everybody else apparently did. But the first imprint it left on me was indeed a deep one, and even through multiple rewatches, it hasn't really shifted. I guess I'm saying I think it's funny, and I'm tired of pretending it's not.
Your point of view is so different from mine.
For those who don't know, The Predator is one of the most disreputable films ever made, and reviled across the board for a multitude of reasons. The plainest is the cliched depiction of Asperger's and Tourette's.
This fucked me in the face with an aardvark.
Others are just general plot holes, like characters teleporting to impossible locations, or tonal shifts, like the ending that switches it up from an adolescent gorefest to a Marvel movie cliffhanger out of nowhere.
Say I won't.
It really is shocking just how much Shane Black, one of the original actors and script doctors from Predator, could misunderstand the appeal of the series he helped cultivate.
So dumb!
And my personal enjoyment aside, it is a shame. Being the only series to never have so much as a recurring character, Predator has never been chained to any real sense of continuity in the way that Alien or Terminator have. So of the three, it has the cleanest slate. And with Shane Black at the helm too, it should have delivered on the unrealized potential the series had been dodging for 30 plus years. So I can certainly see how those expecting a serious entry were soured by how far it fell from its potential, on top of all the other aforementioned disgraceful elements. But what can I say? I laughed at the stupid jokes.
Is it just your imagination? Or is this haunted room actually stretching?
Every fucking time?
I really enjoyed the bloody violence.
Everything okay back there?
And I especially loved whenever the two came together, like when this one guy gets absolutely fucked on. Or when this other guy accidentally blows his own head off.
Jesus Christ, great.
This being the main villain, by the way, and he's dropped from the story like this with no further mention whatsoever. Add to this the Predator dog that becomes docile and a very good boy, thanks to the bullet the good guys lodged in its head. Because why the fuck not at this point? And sure, it becomes harder and harder to defend, but I can't lie to myself either. This is a stupid movie that felt laser-sighted to appeal to the maladapted teenager in me, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I mistook it as a comedy, turned off my brain, and had a fucking whale of a time, leaving The Predator now as one of my absolute guiltiest pleasures that I do not recommend to anyone.
We took a vote. Predator's cooler, right? Fuck yeah.
Number 8. Predators doesn't waste your time.
Hey, don't flip me off, you son of a bitch!
Of all the Predator sequels, it's the one that relies the most on the original framework, only inverting a few of the key elements. And while it'd be fair to accuse it of being too derivative at times, there are enough signs that this was a passion project from director Nimrod Antal, and he made respectable decisions along the way, starting with what is honestly one of the leanest cold opens I've ever seen. Royce, our protagonist, begins in freefall, immediately demanding our attention and having us piece together what is happening in real time alongside him. It's an imaginative way of getting around what could have otherwise been prosaic or boring exposition, and with each new character introduction, more is revealed about why this particular group of people may have been selected for what looks like a hunt on a game reserve.
Calm down.
Once everyone has their bearings, it's clear we're dealing with a disparate group of killers and their quick mistrust of one another. Their only shared motivation being survival, and each one has a unique background and abilities they keep purposefully ambiguous as they figure out whether and how to band together for mutual gain. This is by far the biggest contrast to the team of the original film, where they were lawful good, these guys are chaotic neutral, inviting in far more opportunities for questioned loyalties and ruthless killings, even from our main character who is anything but a traditional hero. The issue that arises though is not the direction itself, but how unbelievably helpful the dialogue is for this not so complicated premise, outright announcing several times the parallels between the Predators and these Predators.
We are predators. Just like them.
Message!
This meant that Topher Grace, as the obvious odd man out, was signposted light years away as the twist villain.
I'm one of you.
No shit. Meanwhile, Lawrence Fishburne, who turns up halfway and immediately betrays the group, felt like a character from a completely different movie, and one whose solitary, insane bullshit ruined an excellent first act pace.
The schools are so much nicer there. And the men, ooh la la.
Shut up, man!
And then there's Adrian Brody, whose grizzled voice was writing checks his body just couldn't cash.
I'm here, kill me.
so a lot of the characters felt on the nose, and yet other characters are able to shine all the brighter thanks to some retroactive star power the movie was lucky enough to be afforded. Actors like Walton Goggins and Mahershala Ali were not household names at the time of release, but their respective profiles have only increased in the intervening years. Since they've now broken the mold of the no-name character actor that before so many in their position, it would turn out a tremendous amount of acting talent went into these otherwise thankless roles, and that makes revisiting Predators all the more appreciable in hindsight, capping that off with the likes of Danny Trejo, who can always be trusted to deliver a Danny Trejo performance, and what you have is a movie that features a greater acting pedigree than first imagined.
What do you do to get into character, or get back into character?
Wake up.
The director also included some nods to classic cinema, presumably the ones that have inspired him outside of Predator. The silhouetted walk along the ridge looks like something out of The Seventh Seal. The exchange of first names at the end echoes 12 Angry Men. And Lawrence Fishburne, misplaced as he is here, was channeling something of Apocalypse Now's Colonel Kurtz, perhaps also an example of stunt casting since he made his debut in that very movie as a young teen. These references by no means make a film automatically better, but these are what give me the sense that the director was a fan first and foremost, and one who got to make the Predator sequel he wanted to see. There are parts where he was unafraid to expand and even challenge some of what came before. For example, the infighting scene in the main group also extends to the Predators themselves, who are in the midst of some kind of civil war. There are the three main antagonists, but with them a prisoner, a more traditional incarnation of the Yautja we know.
Jake! Who the fuck you think you fucking with? I'm the man up in this piece!
Facilitating for the first time a full-on Yautja on Yautja fight in the climax. Taking that a step further was how Predators supplied us the long-awaited honorific fight to the death we were robbed of, both from the stoic tracker Billy from Predator and the corrupt kingpin Willie from Predator 2. No matter how lionized these films get, these off-screen deaths are certainly not above criticism, and Predators answered for that with a silent night fight in a green field, between a Yautja and a disgraced Yakuza seeking redemption, with both eventually succumbing to their wounds together. It's fucking great and went on to earn a reputation as a series highlight. For all its lifting, I wouldn't call Predators lazy. It suffered in a way that a lot of franchise sequels do, in that it had to be accessible for newcomers who may not have any concept of the Yautja in mind, while appeasing the existing fanbase who would hold it to sharp scrutiny. It tried, but it couldn't break the sequel barrier like its contemporaries Aliens and Terminator 2. Nevertheless, where it forewent the slow tension of the original, it delivered immediate action, scratching a different kind of itch. So I say judge it as innovation and it withers in the shadow of Predator, but as iteration, Predators is plenty entertaining and a worthy enough successor even if it still left us wanting.
I run shit here! You just live here!
Number 7.
It was at this moment that he knew he fucked up.
Terminator Salvation remains to this day the only Terminator sequel venturous enough to build on the original story without merely repeating Terminator 2.
The fuck?
It depicts the oft-mentioned but as yet unseen future war between John Connor and the machines, detaching itself from franchise staples like time travel and Arnold Schwarzenegger in favor of a gritty post-apocalyptic war. This positioned it as the second half of the predestination paradox as established in the Terminator, making it the closest we've gotten to an authentic companion piece, one that doesn't disregard any previous sequel but can still be treated as a direct follow-up to just the original. However, in boiling it down to its bare essential elements, it was perhaps boiled down a bit too much, removing all of the colour and vibrancy and losing a lot of flavour as a result. So while it may not have been a rehash by Terminator standards, it was unfortunately a rehash of just about every other action movie in existence, being a little bit Apocalypse Now, a little bit Transformers, a little bit Mad Max, and so the meta question that suddenly loomed over was, should Terminator, with all of its pedigree, really be the one co-opting these trends when it had previously been the one to pioneer them?
Because every single thing in it is mid!
The film's production was far from simple though, as it was plagued with rewrites and conflicting visions, many of which found their way to the final cut. The result is a sequel where, much in the same vein as say Alien 3, contains a lot of richness, and its ambitions, even the failed ones, are made all the more interesting for the subtext you can still unearth.
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
The protagonist is original character Marcus Wright, a man sentenced to death only to awaken in the future as an infiltration unit, unaware that he is now a machine sent to destroy the Resistance. And as a side note, it's sad to say that Salvation, for all its bucking of Terminator-related trends, didn't buck the worst one, which was giving away their mid-movie twists in the fucking trailers.
Stop it!
Marcus personifies a theme the movie occasionally pays lip service to regarding the blurred line between man and machine, as once he becomes self-aware, he resists his programming without hesitation, and continues to fight, having crossed paths with both a young Kyle Reese and a grizzled John Connor.
Oh, good for you!
John Connor, in his prime, was now represented through the concomitant star power of Christian Bale. He had just wrapped The Dark Knight, which was easily the hypest blockbuster movie of its generation.
I am Batman!
And proof that Bale had the capacity to put his stamp on an iconic character, even one as mythologized as John Connor. And yet to this day, he is rarely associated with the role, unless of course it's for the wrong reasons.
I want you off the fucking set, you prick!
It may have been that Bale was channeling too much of Batman rather than taking the time to create something new.
Tell me where I can find calories.
And through their interactions, it became increasingly clear that both of these two were vying for the main character spot. And this is where some of the rewrites really start to show themselves. The most consequential was how Kyle Reese was explicitly introduced as Skynet's #1 target, prioritized for termination even above John Connor. This confirms then that Skynet must know of the importance of his eventual role in taking them down. After that setup, he reverts back to just being another scrappy rebel, unremarkable in the broader narrative. But the whole third act revolves around John and Marcus teaming up to rescue him from certain death as he's captured and placed within Skynet's prisons. So Skynet have identified him but not terminated him, even though they're aware this would secure their victory in the war by creating a time paradox and wiping out John Connor. It's a fairly major plot hole, and issues just like it permeated the script even to the very finale. The ending we got had Marcus donate his heart to John, saving his life and fulfilling Marcus's original purpose. And this was certainly the best of all the considered outcomes. One of the leaked alternatives, however, was for John Connor to actually die and have Marcus take his face and continue the fight. On the one hand, this works as in universe, John Connor is simply a disembodied voice to many of the people. It's not the man, it's the message that's important. And this one will bring in the added layer of irony that Skynet helped to orchestrate its own downfall through Marcus. This was probably another reason why Bale was selected for the role, as he'd achieved the exact same motif in Batman Begins.
There's a symbol that can be incorruptible. What symbol? Something.
Shut the fuck up, Bruce!
But on the other hand, it ultimately betrays the core of these movies, which is man's triumph against machines. The influence of John Connor shouldn't be predicated on a lie, nor should the character die, let alone become a Terminator.
No!
For sidestepping that, I'd say the real ending we got is forgivable, if a bit hokey. Salvation, for some, will always maintain its original reputation as an amalgamation of generic action tropes in bland packaging. But I actually think it's a perfectly decent movie, and I really believe there is something substantive to excavating all of its unfostered concepts and thematic underpinnings and assessing their value. Where it ultimately kneecapped itself was in purporting to start a new trilogy. Had they simply ended this with Kyle Reese traveling back through time, they could have neatly closed the established narrative within just this one movie, while opening the door for more stories set in the future or current war. It would complete the circle of the Terminator and satisfy the concept of Terminator 2 that the future is not set and there's no fate but what we make. The franchise could then innovate without concern for its effect on the prior continuity, and we'd avoid sinking to the depths of the current 5th and 6th installments and their baseless hatred for the heroism of John Connor. Perhaps whatever unmade sequel was lined up would have veered back towards the nighttime stealth and colourful lasers of old, tributing its roots, or continued its own pattern of impressive long shots and stunt work, banging licensed soundtrack, and for my money some of the best Terminator effects yet, from the Transforminator or the Worminator,
You motherfucker, you!
to the T-800 factory in the finale, laden with extensive practical effects work, a final sign-off from the legend Stan Winston himself before he passed away in 2008. As his final contribution to cinema, Salvation shouldn't be overlooked. Even up until the end, the man kept his word. He didn't just do creatures, he did characters.
What should I tell your men when they find out you're gone?
I'll be back.
Number 6. Alien and Terminator are creatures of pure evil, unencumbered by any trace of morality, remorse, or even fear. Their killings are based on instinct or programming, respectively, and the absence of any docility whatsoever is what makes them so formidable and so terrifying.
You're looking for Predator, aren't you?
Yes.
Predator is a whole different kind of beast. Its motivation isn't one of survival or necessity, but sport, and throughout its debut movie, hints of its heightened aptitude are bled to us piece by piece. It understands stealth tactics, it shows a level of sportsmanship, and it even feels pain. And as our main characters grew to understand what they were up against, their chances of survival barely shifted. Such was its ability to effectively adapt to its surroundings. These are the qualities that elevate Predator, and this complexity had the added effect of characterizing the heroes as simultaneously indestructible US Special Forces unit and underdogs completely exposed and outmatched. Critics at the time savaged the movie, taking the flat camera work, trite spectacle, and macho one-liners that make up the first act at face value.
I'm ballsy.
Rather than recognizing how paramount these were at setting the stage for the predator to enter. As with any good creature feature, the predator is only hinted at in the beginning, lurking somewhere off screen, having only left behind a collection of skinless corpses. This allowed Dutch, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, to lead his testosterone-fueled team to glory in a guerrilla-style invasion on a jungle compound. What follows is something that most 80s action films would save for their third and final act, but Predator doesn't fuck around at all.
Dylan! You son of a bitch.
It uses audience expectations in its favor, indulging them in all the firepower they'd associate with the film going in, only to cleanse the palate and allow the real movie to begin shortly after. It's a bait and switch done phenomenally, and the team's victory is so effortlessly secured and their camaraderie so in your face, you'd be forgiven for believing that the real Predator was the friends we made along the way. But on the way home, the jungle falls silent. Suddenly, the jokes cease. Dutch's team had just proved they were the best of the best, but here they're left impotent, firing blindly at their target and barely able to graze it. Now Predator turns into an action movie with a slasher villain. Act 1 had the cheesy one-liners you'd find in any generic action movie of this era.
Knock, knock.
But Act 2 demonstrates how self-aware these were, only to strip them of their hubris as they wander through the landscape like lambs to a slaughterhouse. The one-liners remain, but they've gone from jovial to cold and stoic. And these are the ones that emerge from the film as the actual classic lines that people still quote today.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
That's the most badass thing I've ever heard.
What's plainly exceptional about Predator is its structure, effortlessly shifting the goals from kill to escape to survive, without ever losing its comprehensibility. And that's with the inclusion of a creature that remains essentially a mystery up until the very end. It's almost like 3 mini-movies stacked back to back, with each one exploring a different genre, creating an overall package where the stakes begin high but are continuously escalating, as every single member is picked off one by one until only Dutch remains. Exhausted, he resigns himself to his fate until he makes a discovery. With no advanced weaponry left, Dutch cakes himself in mud, hiding from the Predator's vision.
Fucking bullshit!
Playing against type, he relies not on his stature but his wits as he sets up traps, constructs a bow and arrow, and waits for nightfall to make his declaration. With almost zero dialogue, Predator's third act descends into a ritualistic combat arena, and in the final showdown, the hunter will become the hunted. This is such a far cry from where Dutch began. What's especially effective about the transition is that our own first look at what the Predator looks like occurs at a time where he himself is blinded to his surroundings and can't get a lock on his target. Now it's his turn to fire indiscriminately at the environment, leveling the playing field back in Dutch's favor, giving him one last chance to end this.
Well, well, well. How the turntables...
When he does, even with the Predator laying there vulnerable and close to death, it's still not fully comprehensible to us. Dutch lives, but it doesn't feel victorious, as he evacuates the jungle and digests everything he's just experienced. Perhaps that same trauma extended to Schwarzenegger himself, who has never returned to the role or the franchise. But I personally love to see the fan theory come true where Skynet develops the look of the T-800 based on an engagement with Dutch, opening the door for a Terminator Predator crossover we're yet to see. But with how grueling the shoot was, filmed almost entirely on location and hampered by exactly the kinds of harsh conditions you might expect, this will likely remain a dream. But what also remains is Predator, the last of the big 3 to stake its claim in action, horror, and sci-fi and dominate all 3. While focused mostly on action, it's still a masterclass in shifting between its genres, while escalating the stakes cleanly and concisely, and an appropriate swan song to a bygone era. Number 5. Prey is a movie that didn't just break with the counterintuitive and frankly fucking stupid naming scheme. It was the entry that finally did what has been intuitively understood ever since each one of these creatures became iconic. It makes fresh use of the premise by way of a brand new setting in time and place, letting the Yautja loose in the northern Great Plains of Native America in the year 1719. This single innovation may seem obvious, but it shouldn't be taken for granted given its unjustifiable absence in all of these years.
Hell, it's about time.
There were prior attempts for sure, but had it gone all the way of something like Assassin's Creed, then by now we could have seen the xenomorph against 18th century pirates or feudal Japanese samurai, or the T-800 dropped in the Old West or medieval England. Really anything that ventured away from the familiar safety of yet another spaceship, city, or jungle. Prey kept the core concept intact, but radically changed the aesthetic, and what followed was a series of simple but affecting battles of wits, as both sides are stripped of modern hardware, back down to more rudimentary weapons like axes and arrows. This newly designed Yautja, dubbed the Feral Predator, lands on Earth and takes on the Comanche tribe, and it isn't long before it establishes its dominance within this new ecosystem.
You know what the chain of command is? It's a chain I go get and beat you with till you understand who's in rotten command here.
But it also shares something of an implicit kinship with our main character, Naru, as both of them must engage in a rite of passage to rise through the ranks of their respective tribes. The feral predator opts to kill its victims by mimicking their methods, only better. It starts with a rattlesnake, its first trophy, whose fangs are no match for its own. Then when fighting the Comanche long distance, it uses its arrows, before switching to a spear up close. Later, when the French colonists shoot it, it has no gun of its own, but the helmet ricochets their bullet back at them.
You a dumbass!
And when they get really ballsy and attempt to capture it with axes, nets, and bear traps, it fucking well uses them right back. You really get the sense that the feral predator is testing how others utilize their own weaponry, and the particular thrill of this hunt is in its one-upmanship. Meanwhile, as it rapidly continues to dictate a new chain of command, Naru is noticeably lagging behind. She's a gatherer specializing in holistic medicines, but determined to prove her worth to this tribe further by graduating to hunter. The movie makes a point that by the time the feral predator has taken out the wolf, she's still struggling with a rabbit.
You cannot be serious!
What she lacks in immediate progress, she makes up for in improvisation, tenacity, and observation. Often she witnesses the mistakes of others and adapts accordingly, allowing her on more than one occasion to slip detection and strike when the opportunity presents itself.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
Anyone might think that tanking a bullet point blank to the back of the head would be enough to finish it, but in classic movie monster fashion, it just keeps going, forcing Naru to reincorporate even more lessons she's taken from her environment. True to the Predator formula, it is exactly Naru's intuition and perseverance that leads her to her ultimate triumph, and in keeping with the trend of this Predator constantly outclassing everyone else's weaponry with its own superior version, it is finally taken out by one of its own arrows, leaving Naru to let out a primal scream, cementing her newfound place as hunter. This is a prequel done correctly. It unmistakably bears the DNA of the original, but very much uses its inspirations to develop its own identity and bring its own flavor. Something I wish they'd opted for was Naru as a stealth protagonist, much in the same vein as the original Alien. It seems to me this would reinforce the communal strength of the tribe early on, while allowing us to see things more closely from the Predator's own perspective, focusing attention on the more obvious antagonistic forces, which then give way for an unknown variable like Naru to come in and get the drop on us. I also think with how breathtaking the natural landscape is, and with how several scenes are carried through visuals alone, Prey could stand to lose almost all of its dialogue.
Didn't think we had time for a nap.
Which only really ever served to state what was already obvious.
That little rat-looking thing just got ate!
But these complaints are minor in the grand scope of things. The real question is Prey a classic?
No.
That remains to be seen, but in all likelihood, no. What it has done, though, is reaffirm exactly why Predator is. And in a landscape where franchise sequels have done more harm than good, and where substandard regurgitations of the originals can still generate continued interest, Prey actually dared to achieve what others so far wouldn't. Its reputation then has the opportunity to only increase from here should future prequels and sequels take from it the correct lessons. As it stands, Prey is a good movie and a great prequel. I hope in time it will be looked back upon as a significant turning point for all three series as they branch out towards endless storytelling possibilities. But for now, this is as far as it goes. And since I'm here, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to watch this ranking. Feel free to comment down below which of the three creatures you think would win in a fight, and be sure to check out my other movie series rankings too, where I also hope to do justice to your favorites. Thank you. Number 4. The final four in this ranking are so refined that any attempts to hybridize action, horror, and sci-fi since have come across as derivative and only ever led right back to them. That is an insane legacy to consider given we're now approaching half a century, but between them they successfully elevated pulp cinema to classic fiction, channeling their B-movie origins by way of A-movie creature design. The debate of which one is ultimately the best will forever be a fun one to have, since it's carried out under the mutual understanding that all four of them are perfectly optimized, and really any quality we have to say for one one could just as strongly apply to the other three.
Damn good deal.
But simply, they're the best of the best. Of the four, three of them were written and directed by James Cameron.
His name is James Cameron, the bravest pioneer. No budget too steep, no sea too deep. Who's that? It's him, James Cameron.
Of those three, two of them were sequels that leaned into the action but left the horror elements intact. And of the two, one of them featured this classic line.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Ripley is the only character in Aliens to not be an original creation from Cameron. Nevertheless, what this line and so many others like it shows is his penchant for writing sequels that believably build upon their central characters, while understanding how to increase their agency. In Alien, Ripley was a survivor, but in Aliens, she becomes a hero. Set 57 years after the events of Alien, Ripley is found adrift in space, and now awakened, is suddenly made to answer for what happened in front of this dispassionate bureaucracy of total bellends. None of them believe her story, and echoing the theme of corporate self-interest from Alien, they revoke her license and she's quickly dismissed. But she then finds that Weyland-Yutani has colonized the very planet the xenomorph came from, ensuring a ticking time bomb, the horrors of which only she has a first-hand account. And as if she hadn't already lost everything, she discovers that while in cryosleep, she outlived her daughter and is now left to grieve alone. Knowing the nightmares won't stop unless she takes action now, Ripley volunteers to return, but this time with a group of colonial marines, and together they will wipe them out. Upon landing back on the xenomorph home planet, Aliens retains the intensity, the claustrophobia, and the sheer terror from Alien, now amplified by the xenomorph's hive mind nature and the reveal of a queen.
Well, screw that!
The stakes are then compounded by the introduction of Newt, a young orphan girl who would have surely died were it not for Ripley's intervention, and so the theme of motherhood comes full circle.
They mostly come at night. Mostly.
This creature was responsible for Ripley losing her daughter and Newt losing her parents, and the shift from pure horror to action fantasy allowed for a more potent level of catharsis than ever before, as Ripley duct tapes two massive guns together and absolutely genocides every one of the Queen's eggs. Aliens may be a lot more indulgent compared to its predecessor, but it's by no means sloppy for it, as the escalating stakes and the deepened characterization keep the familiar beats from feeling too stale. This also extends to the supporting cast of characters who, despite essentially serving the same function as one another in the plot, each managed to find their own distinct voice.
I'm shocked.
Bishop, played outstandingly by Lance Henriksen, is an excellent subversion of Ash from Alien. Ripley holds on to her prejudice against androids ever since one of them tried to choke her out with a magazine, and though he offers words of reassurance, these are openly contested.
Get the fuck out of here! No, I cannot, it's serious!
Bishop exhibits the same fascination with the facehugger as Ash once did, indicating his corporate loyalty, when in actuality his upfront sincerity was a way of disguising the subversion, allowing for a rat like Burke to take full advantage. This man is such a douchebag that his collar is popped by design, and he even sits on a chair backwards just to hammer that point home.
Bobby.
Thanks to Bishop's morally dubious behavior, his sliminess was hidden in plain sight, and it shows Cameron is uniquely good at reversing the polarities of established characters between films, and this is what allows his sequels to stand tall as some of the most widely recognized and respected in the industry. Finally, there are the Marines themselves.
What is it, Hicks?
Hudson, sir. He's Hicks.
Gorman is out of his element. His mixing up of Hicks and Hudson does a good job indicating their later importance, while organically demonstrating that he doesn't know these guys as well as they know each other. Half the Marines are then wiped out due to his ineffective orders, breeding a lot of contempt. And Vasquez especially hates him, since his hesitation to act is what got her friend Drake killed. This is brought to a head just before the end, when the xenomorphs close in on an injured Vasquez, and Gorman goes back to try to save her.
Were an asshole, Gorman.
Vasquez is still giving him shit even to the very end, but in heroic fashion he ignites a grenade, this time without hesitation. Even with their limited time on screen, it's easy to get the sense of Vasquez and Drake's backstory. I always imagined the special handshake they share was an unspoken pact that one day this is how they'd go out, sacrificing themselves. For her to then share that with Gorman of all people shows that in their final moments he has earned her respect, and the two go out in style. This is just one subplot that supports no less than 3 supporting characters, yet they were all given completed arcs that naturally weaved into the main plot. All of this gives Aliens a degree of cohesion where most sequels would have simply banked on Ripley's character alone, and for that I'd say honestly any named character here could be someone's favourite. The movie is of course best experienced in tandem with the original, but on the strength of its own contributions, it's one of those elusive sequels that functions as a standalone too. Not many directors can boast of that kind of reputation, taking a classic and making a follow-up that rivals it in quality, especially as an outsider coming into the franchise for the first time. But Cameron not only pulled it off, he was just getting started.
They mostly come at night. Mostly.
Number 3.
Nice to see you.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day feels like the movie Cameron always wanted to make but couldn't until he'd made a name for himself. His first movie was Piranha 2 The Spawning, which is exactly as sophisticated as it sounds. But this earned him the chance to create The Terminator, a low-budget independent movie that only gradually crept up in popularity over time. The success of Aliens then legitimized him as a director to watch, allowing him to revisit the first movie universe he'd created himself, along with $100 million to play with. The gap between The Terminator and Terminator 2 was a mere 7 years, but the slow burn success of the first film, coupled with the explosive popularity of its star, meant in that time, Cameron had gone from having to tactically avoid the police just to get shots for which he didn't have a permit, to helming the single most expensive film to date. That's as vast a landscape as I think can exist between a movie and its immediate sequel, and yet they're both outstanding. In true Cameron fashion, Terminator 2 uses the same template as the original but reverses key roles and escalates the stakes with a new focus on action.
Get down. Oh shit! Oh shit!
In an exceptional first act twist, for which Terminator 2 doesn't get nearly enough credit, the T-800 is now the good guy, taking over from Kyle Reese as the role of Protector and facing the new threat of the T-1000, a single experimental unit made of a liquid metal alloy so powerful and seemingly unstable that if it went rogue, it could probably render the machines just as obsolete as humans were to the machines. It's obvious Cameron had learned a lot even from his relatively limited filmography at this time. He carried over shots from the Terminator to subtly indicate the identity of the true villain ahead of the actual reveal. He pursued the theme of fatherhood, having wrapped up the matching theme of motherhood in Aliens, only this time infusing it with a larger scale impact on humanity. And the T-1000 was his first means of pushing boundaries with special liquid effects that would later become synonymous with the man and his lifetime fascination.
Yes, officers, there's something wrong?
Have you seen this boy?
To measure the strength of an icon is to see its lasting impact on us in the real world, but to measure the strength of a character is to see how they affect the people around them in universe. And that brings me to one of the more powerful scenes in Terminator 2, the reunion between the new T-800 and Sarah Connor. Continuing Cameron's penchant for starting our heroines out with less than what they ended with before, we find Sarah Connor locked away in a mental institution. Her catastrophizing about the very real oncoming apocalypse has led self-serving government officials to isolate her from her son and society. Far from the timid waitress of old, she is spending her days building up her physical strength and mental fortitude. But on the night she decides to break out, everything is going her way until she reaches the elevator. So completely disillusioned with all her greatest traumas manifesting themselves right in front of her eyes, she's completely flawed, regressing so hard into helplessness she's barely able to register her own son's voice right beside her. The T-800 murdered the man she loved, it threatens her son who is confused and vulnerable, and if it can stop her from reaching him, all of humanity is doomed. She takes her chances running back into the jaws of darkness, only for it to catch up, stand over her, and echo the words,
"Come with me if you want to live."
This line is the only thing that could have reached through to Sarah in her panic-stricken state. But when we stop to consider the causality loop, we can conclude that not only was the T-800 programmed by the future John Connor to say these exact words, but in all likelihood that was an instruction given to him by Sarah Connor herself. And it's incredible how a simple line like that can deepen so many characters independently, satisfying both the rational and emotional components of the story.
Tell me that shit not 10 out of 10, I'll sock the shit out of you, Barney.
While the T-800 is seen effectively emulating human traits, Sarah Connor pursues the opposite. Now that she's escaped, she takes it upon herself to coldly assassinate a man named Dyson. His research will feed directly into Skynet, though this is unknown to him at the time as he lives out a relatively benign life as a typical family man. The fact of his innocence does little to deter Sarah from her mission, however, and that lack of humanity is palpable throughout this world, from John's foster parents always arguing, to the scumbag doctors who take advantage of Sarah. It leaves John to wonder in the middle of the movie if we're gonna make it after all, but unbeknownst to him at this moment, he now has a father figure, the interactions with which will provide him the conviction necessary to grow into his role. John is the center of all of this. At separate times, he brings both the T-800 and Sarah away from the brink, actively preventing them from taking innocent lives. It shows in true hero fashion his determination to win the war, but not at the cost of our humanity. And having internalized that lesson, by the end, the same rebellious boy who didn't even blink when he received the news that his foster parents were killed, is devastated when the T-800 dies.
I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
Oh my god, are you crying?
No, it's just raining.
What a fucking movie. Terminator 2 supplants the bittersweet finale of the Terminator with bright prospects for a future not yet made, and one that we can determine for ourselves, with a message that empowering and one that befitted the franchise's new identity as summer action blockbuster. There's a reason why it's the one that every other Terminator tries to be, and why the bar for action has yet to be surpassed. So, you know, watch it. Number 2. H.R. Giger may well have produced the most horrifying creature design in film history. The blatant phallic and vaginal imagery in the xenomorph prods and penetrates the human psyche and taps into our primal fears, creating a horror classic in Alien, where, very much like its creature, you can't help but admire its purity.
Perfect organism.
Setting the stage are an entire 5 minutes worth of quiet traversal through the Nostromo, which is almost a character in of itself. Like a honeycomb crossed with a hospital, it's at once lived in yet sterile, offset by the grime and dankness of the engineering rooms along with the inherent sense of isolation felt in outer space. Nothing is glamorous here, and exploration is routine. The smoky, veteran blue-collar workers are prematurely awakened from their incubation, but no one person is given any more attention than anybody else. They are all equal, both under the hand of the unfeeling Weyland-Yutani Corporation, who are knowingly steering the crew into danger, and in the eyes of the xenomorph itself, who hunts them all indiscriminately. This meant Alien could hide its true protagonist until the very end, reinforcing the explicit theme of expendability, while keeping the deaths unpredictable and the atmosphere tense. The first casualty is Kane. He leads the expedition down to the planet where they first encounter the alien eggs. The plot then revolves around his recovery, leading up to his iconic death that encapsulated the xenomorph's horrific melding of body violation, suggestive imagery, and graphic violence. Next is Brett, who along with Parker traffics in the theme of worker exploitation, fleshing out the sense of ambivalence from the faceless people who ordered the capture of the xenomorph in the first place. By the time of Brett's death, it is transformed dramatically. We can see that while decidedly alien-like, the xenomorph is also close to the observable horrors of our own world, showcasing gestation periods and behaviors not uncommon to parasites, spiders, and snakes, only all in one creature and on a monstrous scale.
Fuck this.
As random as the kills appear, however, each one organically propels the plot forward in a logical way. For example, with 2 of his crew dead, naturally, Captain Dallas takes matters into his own hands. But every decision he makes is a fuck-up, whether he's breaking quarantine or volunteering to face the xenomorph himself without any backup. His death puts Ripley in charge, and her new clearance allows her to expose the company's duplicity, as well as reveal Ash to be a literal corporate droid.
What the hell was that?
The introduction of a stealth secondary antagonist was a fresh means of breaking up the conflict. It recontextualizes Ash's push to either protect the xenomorph or expose others to it, and pushes Ripley more towards the central role. Now with just 3 characters left alive, there are enough spaces on the emergency shuttle for everyone to escape, prompting a new plan to set the Nostromo to self-destruct along with the alien inside. A nice big double fuck you to the company. This is where Ripley splits up from Parker and Lambert, and judging from any conventional horror tropes, everything suggests that she will be killed next. But in one of the movie's most understated Mr. Eggs, it's actually Parker and Lambert who are killed together. I say this because Parker was the one who at this stage most closely resembled the mold of main character, while Lambert stood in as the audience surrogate. And in any other horror, these are the 2 that might have survived to the end. He's a man of conviction and action, saving Ripley from Ash and rushing to kill the chestburster. He's also the one with the personal stake, having lost a friend in Brett. And finally, he's the main vehicle for the themes of social class and expendability, representing the other's grievance over pay.
And that's exactly what the company wants.
Meanwhile, Lambert accurately captures the distress and tension brought by the xenomorph, essentially feeling everything we are feeling. Her paralysis in the face of fear is the one thing that directly prevents Parker from taking action against it, and the ordeal would cost both of them their lives, setting Ripley up as the lone survivor. Ripley makes for an exceptional stealth protagonist because her intelligence, level-headedness, and courage were always on display throughout, only casually dismissed and made more obvious in hindsight. Now she uses those exact qualities to excise the xenomorph into space once and for all, ending the nightmare and leaving her to traverse the universe alone, unsure of what other horrors lay in the cosmic horizon.
They are so cute.
Horror films tend not to have such strong characterization, but Alien saved itself from becoming any disposable run-of-the-mill movie with its considered pace, tightly reinforced themes, and incredibly developed characters. Ripley stood among fierce competition as the strongest of them and rightly became an icon. But the ultimate star of Alien is and always will be the xenomorph itself. H.R. Giger's graphic fusion of cosmic horror with sex and violence may be fundamentally troubling, but that's what gives it its enduring power, and in creating it, he gave the world of cinema a contemporary design for the ages. There'll never be another quite like it. Number 1.
A lot of people think of the movie as being like this, kind of like big hit and so on and so forth. And it did well, but it wasn't in the top 20 movies in 1984.
By 1984, it would only be one more decade before CGI became the new industry standard and completely revolutionized the way movies are made. The Terminator, marked in time by its use of old-school techniques like puppetry and stop-motion effects, was really one of the very last of its kind. It was the tail end of a classic movie-making era that reaches as far back as the likes of King Kong or Jason and the Argonauts. Yet its story and concepts were also prescient enough to address the future-facing concerns of looming nuclear holocaust and the rapid rise of artificial intelligence.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
The Terminator, then, is a rare case of a film where it's apparent that what you're watching is of its generation, but the cultural aspects only became increasingly relevant as time moved forward, and its execution remained absolutely flawless.
Example.
Hi there, you're talking to a machine.
Look at it this way, in 100 years, who's gonna care?
Yes, sir.
You can also customize your level of engagement without sacrificing the experience, opting to either revel in all of its complexities and wider implications, or simply enjoy it as the traditional cat and mouse game that is the T-800's pursuit of Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese's mission to stop him at all costs.
The choice is yours.
Her fate will determine the fate of the future, and it's a question of how long can the good guys keep outpacing the bad guys. But something the Terminator does uniquely compared to its later entries is set a clear line of separation between the two warring factions. There is no ambiguity here. The humans are good, the machines are evil, and the T-800 is a monster. As the film progresses, the T-800 begins to deteriorate in unsettlingly menacing ways. It starts subtle with the loss of its eyebrows, but before long it's holed up in an apartment, apparently oblivious to the stench of its own rotting flesh and the flies buzzing around it. This makes for one of the purest slasher experiences in the medium, with the relentless pursuit only getting uglier, and the T-800's final form, with its threatening yet sleek design, stands in direct contrast with the movie's main hero, Kyle Reese. Very much the human element of this film. Every action he takes demonstrates his resourcefulness, but with a degree of scrappiness about it that offsets the calculated movements of the T-800. He makes his own sawn-off shotgun while the Terminator has a laser sight. He hotwires cars while the Terminator takes them with force. And he carries cash in a bundle because in his future it doesn't exist. He's someone who has always kept himself in a permanent mode of survival, but this only barely outpaces his natural vulnerability. The few times he rests are short-lived, as even the mere exposure to diggers and headlamps of the present, which serve as progenitors of tank rollers and searchlights of the future, is enough to snap his focus back on the mission with no time to waste. It's really tragic to think that had he been born in any other era, he would have led a much less futile life.
Snake, are you okay? Snake?
His hardened exterior is a byproduct of the desperation brought on by his living conditions, and the only person who could ever manage to break through was Sarah Connor. As would go on to become the film's major twist, Kyle Reese wasn't merely sent back in time to protect her, but to father her son, thereby creating the circumstance where Skynet cannot come into existence without John Connor, and John Connor cannot come into existence without Skynet.
Because it's a circle.
Yeah, we heard about the circle.
Yes, we're familiar with shapes.
John is preordained to become humanity's savior, just as Skynet is destined to wage this apocalyptic war forever, perhaps even deliberately so as to give perpetual meaning to their existence and doom humanity in an endless cycle. The twist alone is classic science fiction, but what's so impressive is the economic storytelling it took to reveal that the Terminator is exactly one half of an entire story, with the other half remaining untold and left to our imaginations. But further still, the wider revelation is not the seamless convergence of action, horror, and sci-fi, but an additional fourth genre.
It's a love story, you know, and that's one of the things that I think that made this movie a success, and I think it's a great love story.
Kyle Reese had never known any kind of life but war and survival, and back in his timeline, in an uncharacteristic moment of refuge, he's able to let his guard down long enough to pull out a photograph of Sarah, the one thing really keeping this fight alive. He had been sought out personally for this mission by John Connor, because unbeknownst to him there was no one else for this job, but Kyle accepts it not just for duty, but for love, and that love is perfectly captured within this single shot.
I used to always wonder what you were thinking at that moment. I memorized every line, every curve. I came across time for you, Sarah. I love you. I always have.
And he never gets the chance to learn that Sarah was actually thinking about him, and in that one moment separated across time, they were thinking about each other. With that kind of love as a foundation, you really believe all the more that the child of these two could one day save the world, and this was achieved without even featuring the character once. The Terminator was lightning in a bottle. Any single component can be broken down, analyzed, and used to teach some techniques about effective storytelling and craftsmanship. It channeled the passion of rogue, guerrilla-style filmmaking into grander concepts that launched the most successful genre blend franchise of all time, and within its story are true heroes, some mythologized, some tenacious, and some reluctant, but all of them keeping the interminable fight of the human spirit alive no matter the odds. Sarah, armed with this knowledge, prepares to drive into the storm, and reflects how their time and love together, however brief, was enough for a lifetime. But one further consideration is that until Judgment Day is stopped, the future will always circle back to the past, meaning their time and love together, however brief indeed, will continue to exist in a fixed point in time over and over again. And so until the world is saved, the love they shared will never really die.